topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Pride Edition. Well, the whole month is the Pride Edition of Triversity Talk. I am Wendy Stewart, and my guest host tonight, I am so excited for the very first time on a virgin journey, is the one and only Jed Ryan. Good evening, Jed.
Good evening, Wendy. And I'm very happy that I can be called a virgin once again in any kind of capacity. So thank you for that.
There you go.
And Wendy, I am always happy to see you, obviously, preferably in person, but virtual in real time is just as good too. You're the only person I clean my computer screen for, so you should be very flattered.
Oh my God, you cleaned your computer screen and your camera and everything for tonight.
Only for you, yes, only for you, Wendy.
Oh my gosh, I am at a loss for words. So how has your Pride been so far, Jed? This is such a crazy month. I mean, we're 2 weeks. We're in the middle of June. What have you been doing some Pride events?
Absolutely. And it's a real shame that cloning has not become affordable for the general public, because I know that you would definitely be the first one online to get it. And absolutely. I would be somewhere down the line, because I would probably wake up late, but I would definitely be on there, because I think that's the only way you could really enjoy Pride in our wonderful, crowded, dirty, noisy, fantastic city during Pride Month. Because
also the other thing that's been going on is because last year we still, we weren't normal. Not that we're normal this year, right? But everything really has opened up. So there's like 4 and 5 and 6 events happening in one night, and it's impossible to get to everything. That's what I'm finding. I'm very excited though. I am going to see Joey Arias, the infamous Joey Arias, at Joe's Pub in New York City on Friday night. For those of you who know Joey Arias or who don't know, an amazing, absolutely amazing performer, and a great way to celebrate Pride. A little low key, but as I was saying earlier today, if I go to everything I'm invited to, my liver will have to be wrung out to dry by the end of the month.
Yes, exactly. And again, until cloning becomes a reality, we all have to just go to as many things as possible. And it's not easy being a full-time socialite. It really isn't. But I do have two things that I have to recommend, though. Yes. And so one of them is this show called True Confessions of the Straight Man. And it is a farce of 90s movies and 90s cultural mores and morals. And it has 2 more shows at the Laurie Beachman Theater. And it's going to be Friday, June 24th, and then Thursday, June 30th. So funny. And again, it's at the Laurie Beachman Theater, which always has these can't miss acts going on there. Right. So highly recommended. And,
and I want to highly recommend, you wrote a really great review of it. And I want to highly recommend that. Where can people find your review?
Oh, thank you for asking. They can go to lavenderafterdark.com. That's my online magazine. And they can read that review there, amongst other fun stuff. So
that's great. And you know what? Your review made me want to go see this play. But the characters all looked really great. I love Confessions of a Straight Man. Do straight men ever confess? I don't know. They never will accept blame for anything. That's right. It's always okay. Now I'm on a tangent. It's always somebody else's fault. But no, the play really looked good, and unfortunately, it's only got 2 more performances, and I'm busy both of those nights. But I love your recommendation, and I want to tell our audience. You have to go online and subscribe to Lavender After Dark. Jed is out all the time reviewing so many really great independent plays, off-Broadway shows. And, we need to get the word out there. Let's face it, theater is much bigger than the Tonys, which I know many of you probably got to watch the other night. I totally loved it. Ariana Dubois, and I screw up her name every time. I do, but she was such an incredible host. And I love watching all the Broadway performances. They really have you chomping at the bit now to go and get tickets to Broadway.
Yes, and as you know from watching the award show, there's just a lot more diversity, and we've really come a long way in theater because we're seeing and hearing voices and seeing people that normally that have been neglected or had not been, their stories have not been heard for such a long time. And it's great that finally it's come like 360 degrees there and all that.
And we are hoping, no matter what the political environment, this diversity continues on Broadway. That's, fingers crossed. So speaking of theater, speaking of playwriting, I'm very excited. Tonight's guest, first of all, we never met, but I will still have him on anyway because he's interesting to me. First of all, our guest tonight is 3rd generation Hawaiian. I just totally love that. Hawaii is one of my favorite places, but I love that 3rd generation. I love the whole cultural thing that comes with that. He is an entertainer, a playwright, a vocalist, an FX artist. He designs dark rides for amusement parks. Okay. He had me at that. All right. I'm a big buff. And it says you got to be a little twisted to do that kind of thing. He's also connected to Mad Monster magazine. He edits and curates a series of Days of the Dead and Black Bedsheet book phenologies. Black bed sheets. Okay, that's got to be from the Darkside. I totally love all of this. And he discovers new horror writers. But you know what? My burning question tonight for our guest is, how are LGBTQ plus people depicted in horror films and in books? So I give you the one, the only Joe Mo.
Yeah.
Wow. That's the best intro ever. I want to know me. That was great.
I'm so happy. I am so happy to. It's so interesting to me. There's so many things I want to ask you. First of all, I want to start, believe it or not, 3rd generation Hawaiian. So I know a little bit about the Hawaiian culture, and to be an LGBTQ person and 3rd generation Hawaiian, there's a whole cultural thing that happens. What was it? What was that like for you? I'm assuming you grew up in either California or Hawaii.
I grew up in Oahu, which is the capital island of Hawaii.
And my
family were very, very well-known performers. Pulu and Luisa were my grandparents who traveled all over the world performing Hawaiian music for mostly in Europe and Southeast Asia. My grand uncle Tau Moi family are very famous in the islands for doing the same in different parts of the country or in different parts of the world. And my dad was a knife dancer at the luau, so he's the Samoan guy that spins the knies around and does the fire knife dancing.
Okay, wait, we have to stop right there. I'm not going to let you over that. So I've seen that performance. That's very traditional, though.
It is. The Nifa Oti, the swords started out as wood, became steel in more contemporary times, and then became an entertainment. People like my dad began using them in luau's and other forms of entertainment for this exciting, almost like a circus act. And when I grew up now, Hawaiian culture it had moved into the realm of entertainment. It's gone back to the more traditional dance and the very spiritual, serious part of the entertainment. But I grew up in showbiz Hawaii, so I had quite an education in our culture, but also in showbiz in general. My dad loved movies, so we were really into the Western entertainments as well.
See, this is absolutely fascinating to me. I love what you're saying, that it has gone from, you know, the glam and bam of Hollywood Hawaii, and now back to more traditional values. What do you think the reason for that is?
I think there's a new generation of people. I mean, you know, there's so much awareness to Indigenous peoples and struggles that we weren't really educated about growing up. Our culture is it's a very interesting thing. We could have a whole segment about this, but it's a very interesting thing that my grandparents, when they traveled, while African American or Black entertainers would have to enter through the back of the clubs that they owned or entertained in, my grandparents walked in the front. We were a different kind of ethnic. We were an exotic kind of friendly native that was very welcome. Hitler came to see my grandmother perform in Germany. Yeah. And so there's always been, I've always been very cognizant of the kind of the privilege of Polynesian entertainers who seem to have a different kind of reception. They were friends with a lot, and plus being in Europe, you know, my grandfather's best friends were Terry Thomas, the actor, Laurel and Hardy, people like that. In the 40s.
Wow.
So, you know, you're talking about Hitler came to see them. You're bringing up things that, like, entertainment, right, can really cross all boundaries in so many ways.
It didn't hurt that my grandma was a super hottie. I think she had fan clubs in Europe 4 years after she died, which she died probably at 82. So she was beautiful, you know, pretty well known in Europe.
What an incredibly rich background to grow up in. So there you are, Joe, right? Now, which I don't even know, what kind of kid were you growing up, you know, because your interests, from what I read in your bio, and you know that you're a little out there, but my God, you come from entertainers, so maybe they didn't think you were out there.
You've probably met some of our purveyors of darkness, you know, whether it's the industrial music people, punk rock, all those people. And I think you'll agree with me, even though we've just met, Wendy, that some of those people are the kindest, sweetest people in the world. And I've talked to enough of them to know that one of the common bonds that we all have is that we keep the darkness in our work and we keep light in our lives. Yes. And I think that that's the reason that you can purvey some very serious issues and things in ways that are from disturbing to heartbreaking and still maintain, you know, a life where you can survive breathing air and living while discussing those things. So I think it's a very good outlet for us to do.
Again, we're talking about, as an outlet, you can use entertainment, right, to express that dark side. Now, in your own creative work, how do you use that dark side?
Well, you know, Jed and I were having a conversation. Jed was kind enough to come see my play, which was Deny We Were, which was at the Fresh Food Festival.
At the Wild Project.
Yeah, at the Wild Project. And Jed was so encouraging and insightful. I think we became lifelong friends on that sidewalk after the show. And his review was so insightful and so encouraging. The kind of encouragement a playwright needs, because it was insightful and meaningful, and told me some things that I needed to work on, as well as some things I'd succeeded at. But I was discussing with him how he was talking about how my characters tend to be relatable, even the bad guys. And, you know, aside from most of us writers will tell you, well, every villain has a mama, you know. For me, horror helped me, because as a kid, I realized very early on that in horror, the reason I was so excited by it was it engaged us on so many levels. You related to the creator, the monster, and the victim. So it kind of gave you a better insight into the dimension of people. And when you learned that the scariest monsters were human-based monsters, I think it all coalesced for me. And so in everything I do, there's at least, whether it's horror genre or not, there's at least an element of suspense. There's an element of humanity, even in my worst characters. and I try to find a way to love them at some point in their life on the page. So
how very powerful that you get to create these characters and you really can make them any way you want. I find it interesting that Jed met you on the sidewalk. You're not the first.
and all of you out there watching can't tell, but Joe is about a foot taller than me. And of course, after the show, that he was surrounded by this paparazzi scrum there. So I had to wait my turn, and he didn't know who I was at that point either. And and to be honest, Joe, I didn't know if your name was really Jomo or if that was a stage name that you had, that you used for entertainment purposes.
Well, I realized
it was your real name when your birthday was on social media, and all of a sudden, all these people with the last name Mo started wishing you a happy birthday. I'm like, oh, that's really his name. It really is.
In Hawaii, it has a little apostrophe after the O, so I'll tell you, it's Moe. Moe.
Moe. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
You got to go with Jomo. In fourth grade, after the teacher said Jomo for the 10th time, you just say, yeah, here.
Yeah. What
So
was it about Joe's characters? Because you did do the review. What was it about his characters that you wanted to give him advice on?
Oh, I don't know if it was advice per se, but all of us in this day and age are flawed, and of course, there's no.
No, you are not getting away with that.
Yeah, perhaps I should say almost all of us, right? So we all have our own individual. We were talking about how different time periods have their own morals and mores, and so one of the characters is a very almost saintly, openly gay uncle who takes in his now college-age nephew. They're not genetically related, but he has been his uncle for all intent and purposes, right? Okay. Raised him from childhood. And the fact that this particular character just endured so much self-sacrifice and still continued to do so. And part of me wanted to see a little bit more of like a naughty side to that character, or see him almost like just because we all have bad habits, some more than others, but we tend to keep them, like along with the skeletons in the closet. So that was probably the thing that I noticed the most, was how virtuous that character was, and how even if he did tilt a little bit in his morality, how the whole play could have had a very different kind of outcome. So
you wanted him to be like a little off kilter in his reality, in who he was. Yeah, a little nasty, as Janet Jackson said. You wanted him to be a little nasty, maybe a little dirty.
Well, the fact that the character was so morally straight was kind of like a great thing, because this particular actor did such a wonderful job that he made it believable. Right. So in that case, it worked. And the entire cast was absolutely wonderful as well.
Sure were.
So, yeah. But Joe, I want to ask you, speaking of New York, while you were in town, it seemed like you really hit Broadway with a vengeance, seeing one play after another. How many shows on Broadway did you wind up seeing? Because there was an awful lot of them.
Well, I actually only saw 3 because I had to watch mine 3 times because I was taking notes and learning. But it's one of those things where growing up, that was, my family was involved in theater and live theater, and my aunt Tani opened King and I with Yul Brynner and started out as a kid and stayed for 9 years till she was one of the wives.
Get out! That's an amazing family legacy.
And with Bjork Lee, who we all know from, who ended up with Michael Bennett, Bjork Lee was one of the children with her. They were good friends from that. But I always had a love for it. Then I was diverted to movies and came to Hollywood. So during the pandemic, I started really examining myself. And one of the things I realized is that I really had neglected that love. And that's when I wrote the play. And also that, coupled with me having to take a real hard look at myself being on lockdown, really ended up changing the trajectory of this part of my life, from horror to more, toward live theater. So that was a really exciting.
And that's interesting to me, that the pandemic for you, because it was so pivotal, in changing your trajectory. Because honestly, the whole thing with the pandemic to me, and I've made films in places like Africa where these kinds of Ebola or malaria or typhoid exist. The fact that something like a pandemic could happen, and it happened so quick, to me, living in New York City, and Jed remembers, it was horror. It was absolutely living horror. And it's funny, you think about horror films. Well, how do you top what had happened here? How do you top that? You know, we were living it. And interestingly enough, you came out with a film, a theatrical production, Deny We Were. Can you give us a little synopsis of the film, of the production?
Sure. Well, you know, I'll give you a very short.
It may be a film one day, though, Wendy. So maybe that was just.
Yeah, I know. I tend to channel things, so it might.
Maybe you're being prophetic.
I tend to write cinematically because that's where I come from. So my scenarios and things are more cinematic. They're just naturally that way. So it could be someday. It hasn't been designed that way. But quick overview: pandemic made me think about myself a bit. In this chapter of my life, I decided you haven't gotten exactly where you want to be, but it's time for you to start thinking about other people. Thus, I came up with the Fanthogies, where I try to discover kids and teach them, mentor them into writing, and then I publish them. And then I give them a show at one of the brick and mortar horror shows. They get to be celebrated. Their friends get to come and they sign books. So I'm just trying to create creativity in the community. And it's ironic because in doing that, when the pandemic hit, I had to examine my portion of my life and think about what I was going to do. And naturally, I started peeling the layers of the onion away, and I started thinking about the triumphs I'd had and feeling very fortunate. I'd been in love a number of times, but feeling also very, very demoralized about the amount of years I'd spent loving people who were incapable of loving me back.
Wow.
And so in getting there, I started thinking, this is the one impetus. This is one thing that inspired me. I thought to myself, here we are, and this dovetails into what you wanted to talk about LGBTQ representation in media and performance entertainment. I thought, here's me. I'm an older guy now, and the last 20 years, I've had a problem that really was exacerbated by the elimination of boundaries. I thought I'd fallen in love with a straight friend because there was no longer that stigma, and there was no longer that nuh-uh. And so I let myself get caught up in that and the possibility of that. And I don't think I ever would have prior to that, because there was enough, there was enough, hand in the air, stop. And now I think that there's just a lot more acceptance on one hand. There's also a lot of people who are more willing to seduce you that way into friendship. Right. And so that's what started the writing of Deny We Were. And Deny We Were, without monologuing about this, I'll just say that it's about a few issues. It's about that issue, about the problems that we have as boundaries disappear. It's also about the havoc that a narcissist can wreak on a family, a willing family who's trying to
anybody, narcissist, or
I mean, some people can run away, but if you've got a kid or a girl, you know what I mean? It's hard. And then the last thing was, in my life, kids are so important to me. It was the responsibility of the gay uncle or the older gay man in mentoring kids without obscuring the line. Because it gets hard sometimes when you've got a 17-year-old kid, an 18-year-old kid who's coming to you and looking up to you and sees the world, the sun rise and set as you're trying to inspire them into their life. It's hard to remember those boundaries, and I always do. So I wanted to suggest ways that people could, and that's one of the elements in the play as well.
But the gay uncle, okay, you depicted the gay uncle in a very positive way. It's interesting, Jed, because it was a little too positive for you. Jed was looking for that little quirk underneath there.
Well, in a way, this is more revolutionary because it shows that some people can still, in this day and age, still really cling on to a very strong moral code. So, yes, it may be unusual, but it's refreshing when you see that some people can actually be like that. Because we all need someone. What's that?
You know what? I also, Jed will test, will back me up. And I also, in the first two acts, before we meet Jimmy, who everybody's talking about as the villain through the whole thing, the narcissistic dad, before we meet him, I try to set it up so that you think you know what's going to happen. You think that the uncle and the kid are going to get together. I set that up very strongly because I want the audience to assume that it's going to be that, because everyone just assumes that's what's going to happen. When there's an attractive kid and a gay older guy, and the kid is vulnerable, and people just assume, oh, I see where this is going.
And explore,
so I yank that rug out at the end of the second act, and then we don't know what's going to happen. Dad comes in, and then it's a different play. So that was intentional.
And dad is really the problem. I love that you made the gay uncle, to be like I mean, come on. Growing up, I had a cousin Petey, and a little kid. I didn't know. Cousin Petey would make these huge parties every year, and I didn't really know Petey at all. But my family would be invited to these huge parties. He would rent a hall, and I remember this as a kid. You're bringing this out in me right now. Cousin Petey had a bow tie and usually like a pastel-colored suit on. What did I know, right? And I would get to go to this great party, and my mother would take me shopping to Alexander's department store in the Bronx and buy me something great to wear. And I remember my mother saying, I'm like, how come, cousin Petey does this? And she says, well, he's a little fagala. I'm like, Mom, what's a fagala? And she's like, well, light in the loafers, right? Remember all those expressions that they used to use. But as a kid, my God, it comes up for me now. I remember these amazing parties, in this family of mine, and cousin Petey was the one who did it, and he made us all welcome. And he was very handsome when I think back now. And what a great memory to have as a kid. So I love that you made, this gay uncle to be a really great influence on the kid. But when we talk about the history of movies or horror films, it's not, that is not always the case. Simone, who co-hosts on this show, we've talked, and I've talked with Bianca Lee, the actress, about in the transgender community, that Bianca Lee has said this: why do they always have to make the transgender person like to be, suffering or losing? It's a negative stereotype. Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe we're going to start to get away from that?
I think that it's, I was telling Jed the other day that I think it's sort of like we're in our 3-act play when it comes to representation. And it was, in the beginning, of course, it was subversive and it was subtextual. And then it became vilified. They were a villain or a serial killer in movies, every movie you can think of, from Dressed to Kill or Freebie and the Bean. These movies that we watched and laughed and didn't even think about what that meant. And then we've reached a point where there was sort of caricature representation, and then we've gotten to a point now that I hope it's going to settle into reality. We've gotten to a point now where it's, where LGBTQ relationships, people, and issues are almost glamorized to the point where it's like, I'm Steven Spielberg, I'm making a movie. Here's my LGBTQ, nod. Here's my flag wave, But I think we're getting to a point that there's so much acceptance in this new generation. Once they come to the forefront, it's going to be a non-issue practically.
Right.
And we're actually going to be included. We're actually going to be, homogenized into this big world of experience and fun. And people are going to actually not only think about, drag queens as, do I want to be a drag queen? It's going to be more like in horror. Do I want to learn horror makeup? Yes. Well, I want to also do glamour makeup.
Right.
Do I want to be a drag queen? Maybe not, but I want to learn this technique, this method. I want to learn this fashion. I want to, There'll be much more of an acceptance of all of the good qualities we bring to the table, rather than this kind of, rubber stamp, here I am. You can be like me or admire me, but we're kind of not going to cross-pollinate it all. We're just going to observe each other. You know what I mean?
Right. Or objectify,
Right.
Jed, do you think we're becoming more fluid in how we depict LGBTQ plus people in film and theater?
Well, when I first came out, like it was about 1994, and I remember reading this article in probably The Advocate or something like that, and it talked about how our community really loved vampire movies. And what was the reason we love the vampire movies? Well, because we relate to the vampires. We only come out at night. We all recognize each other. We're considered outcasts by mainstream society. But then the worst part is, though, that certain people look at us as predators too, as dangerous, as dark and dangerous and mysterious. And sure enough, when I was doing some research about this, I realized that the movies that we really shaped our opinions about LGBTQs, and particularly, you mentioned transgender people, particularly transgenders, or people who cross-dress. Some of those movies are considered classics. And Joe, I did take the liberty of looking at some of your favorite movies and your favorite horror movies, and sure enough, what was on there? Silence of the Lambs, and right, and there was another one, Silence of the Lambs, and there was another one on there. Oh yeah, Psycho, of course, naturally.
Psycho, right.
And what's extraordinary is, and those are both fantastic movies. I think they're on most horror movies fans' lists as favorites. But unfortunately, they also did shape images of our community for decades to come. Yeah, and right. And then when I started looking at just how many there were, even like these titles that we didn't even think about, of course, there was a Sleepaway Camp, one of my favorites, which is so silly in a way you can't even take it too seriously. But just the list goes on and on. Stripped to Kill, and Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and Deadly Blessing, and Deranged, and Dressed to Kill, and Three on a Meat Hook. I'm like, oh man, it just goes on and on. And a good friend of mine, Mark Levy, who does his one-man show, The Blockbuster Guy, he talks about how when he was a kid, growing up in the 90s, Ace Ventura was one of my favorite movies, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
I love it. It's great. Absolutely great.
Well, it on the surface, but at the same time, though, he was saying about how he looks back at it now and realizes that it was just incredibly transphobic and very derogatory towards transgender women. And so he can't really, it kind of affected how he saw that movie, even though it was a favorite when he was a kid. So I admire the fact that Hollywood and especially independent filmmakers are really, we've come so far that the younger generation may find it hard to believe what was the past. But I think we also have to keep in mind those stereotypes in the past and those images that we create, and just try to not make the same mistakes in the future. So,
yeah, I totally agree with you. So this is for both of you. Did either of you get to watch the Tonys?
I was working.
Okay, so the one that the theatrical piece that won for the best musical, and you know what it's about, a queer Black writer telling the story of what it's like being a queer Black writer, and such a poignant piece, and about his life of never being able to, really please his parents or anybody, going for those unattainable relationships. And this show, The Straight Loop, took the best musical. To me, that was absolutely groundbreaking on many levels. And as a matter of fact, the whole Tonys was really about this year, diversity. And I'd like to feel, right, that from Broadway, from off Broadway, and then now the film's coming out, maybe everybody will follow suit, right? Maybe it'll just be one big fluid thing. I mean, do we see that as being a possibility?
I do, with every generation's, heart stopper, with every generation's Call Me by Your Name, with every generation's film about LGBTQ people who are prevented from love by circumstances, not by other people. I think that really helps, and I think that these things are aimed at younger people. And I think it really shapes their feelings about themselves. For me, you know, living in Hawaii, there wasn't really a big stigma, but watching things from the mainland, movies and things like that, I didn't really relate. And I didn't think about, but then, you know, I was not a naive kid, but I didn't know. I knew I had feelings. I knew about my feelings, but I never thought that there was a gay person who would actually end up with another same-sex person and have a life. I thought
you didn't think, wow. And you grew up, I was going to say,
no.
like, I just assume you grew up in an entertainment family.
Yeah,
So
everybody's accepted. Everybody's fine. Yeah. Everybody's always half naked, so lots of stuff is going on. But I just
we've got knives, we've got people naked. We got it all.
You're on the beach around a bonfire drinking rum, and you're drunk with a bunch of friends. Who knows what's going to happen? But in my mind, I didn't understand, you know, that there was actually, you could make a conscious decision to be with someone who was of the same sex, or you know, an unconventional relationship that would be, you know, a lifelong thing. I thought, we're just going to have fun because we're young and we can do whatever we want. But at some point, it's got to be the white picket fence, a dog, 2 kids, and a wife. You know what I mean? I just,
it's an option. Wow.
Yeah.
Go
when
figure.
I learned it was an option, my life changed.
I'm sure big time. I'm curious, how old were you when you learned it was an option for you?
Probably like 15.
Okay, so it wasn't that far along. You know, you weren't like 28, 29.
I wasn't 32. Yeah,
right.
At a Denny's going, hey, wait a minute. You know.
Denny's. It's interesting because I love when you talk about your background, because I'm here in the Northeast with Jed. We live in New York City, and I've been.
And we love it here so much. We love it here so much. We love it here so much.
We wish we were in Hawaii, but one of the things that fascinated me about Hawaii, I've spent a lot of time in my life with Indigenous people. And I love the tradition. Absolutely love it. I love the culture. I love the respect for the elders and the respect for the history. And one of the things I learned about your culture from another incredible artist who Jed knows, you probably will know too, Raven O, performer and artist who's now back in Hawaii. But Raven O in her cabaret did a whole aspect of being male and female, that there's a word for it in Hawaii, and you probably know what it is.
I do. I can't summon it.
But they're, you know, living in one body. And I thought, my God, that's it. Mm-hmm. You know, the culture absolutely gets that you can be male and female in one body. Mm-hmm. And I never knew that before. And now I'm learning there's lots of indigenous cultures that certainly First Americans have embraced that thought as well. We carry that with us, right, into quote unquote modern times. And yet this is something that has existed before with indigenous people. Mm-hmm. The horror hook, though, for you, coming from your background, when did you learn that horror floated your boat?
Probably from the beginning. I think it was the incredible amount of craft and artistry in it, makeup, design, and just the intensity of the crafting of storytelling and things like that. The darkness also scared me and fascinated me because it was mysterious, and it was the closest thing to religion I will ever get to, because it made you believe in things that didn't exist. You know, it made you wonder, and I just loved it. My father helped because he was a huge movie fan. He just loved movies of all kinds. I'll never forget the day that he appeared at I must have been 4. He appeared at my school, and I thought, what happened to Mom? And he said, come here. And he took me out of school, and I went to the Falcon station wagon, the blue Falcon station wagon. Must have been 1964, 8, I don't know. But he put me in the back with my brother, and we were terrified. And he'd gone to see Planet of the Apes on opening day. And he was so impressed, he left in the middle of it to take us to the next show. That's how much he loved movies.
Oh my God, I love your father. I never met him.
Wow. I would have loved him. He would have worked with him, and he would have said, on today's, he was in, because his parents toured and traveled and entertained. He was raised in British boarding schools. He was a big brown guy who was a great actor and entertainer. He'd get called for Hawaii Five-0 once every month. He'd come in, they'd give him the lines and say, you know, he had an English accent. They'd say extra, and they'd make him sit in back because he didn't sound like a local person. So that was my dad. You know, you'd work with him in a day. You'd say, for today's assignment, I want you all to grab your pencils and your notebooks. We're going to the movies. And he'd take you to the movies, you know.
But how incredibly cool to have a father like that actually understood that part of the kid's education really is in film. So you had that support for your fascination with horror from the get-go. I've always been fascinated by horror films. My favorite thing, I love turning out all the lights and watching scary films. You remember snuff films, both of you.
Sure.
Yeah, those were amazing to me because I'm like, oh my God, did they really kill somebody on the set? And as twisted as it sounds, there's a part of you that wants to believe that really happened and that they made.
Well, you know, we're never more excited than when it's not happening to us, right?
Oh my God!
As long as we make it out alive, that's all that matters, right? You know.
And you know, if you go back to the classics, it brings us right back to our topic of conversation. If you look at Bride of Frankenstein, now with our knowledge that James Whale was a gay director, and you look at all of this plea for companionship, and the hermit scene where the monster cries tears because he's finally found a friend, and the rejection, you know, just the entire thing. If you look at it through the gay lens or through the LGBTQ lens, you'll see a movie that will touch you in different ways, because as the best films were in a time of repression or in a time of you know, different mores, you know, people found ways, especially creative geniuses found ways to approach, you know, very, very intimate and very, very you know, heartrending, you know, subjects, personal subjects, in subversive ways that allowed them to put it on a screen for those lucky enough to experience it, you know, through that lens.
But now I will never look at that film. That was one of my favorite films as a kid, and
still one of mine.
You, right, Chet? For what a tidbit to share. Like in the last seconds, the fact that you said that, that never occurred to me ever, and it's all there. You're absolutely right.
And we were just talking.
So we're down to like our last 5 minutes where you get oh no, you get to talk about anything that you want to talk about. And so this is my question: what kind of rides do you design for, like for dark rides? Tell me what's involved. I never met anyone that did that.
I had a company with one of my best high school friends, John C. Goss, who's a tremendous artist. I've met a lot of artists, and him and my dad probably are the most naturally talented people I've ever met. But John and I created a company. John was a laser animator, and he'd met so many people around the world that he decided, I'm going to quit my corporate job. I'm going to go to all these people that couldn't afford us, and I'm going to offer our services. So John and I would go to China, to Thailand, and we'd find his clients that wanted that had a pre-existing ride, but they wanted it themed. Then we'd come back here, we'd design it, fabricate it, ship it over, and we'd install it. So suddenly a train ride would become Spooky Castle, a witch's castle. We'd come up with a whole scenario of what happened. And so it was our job to create scenarios and fabricate, you know, the rooms that would populate these haunted rides. And we would have still been doing, we did it until the Asian economy collapsed and nobody could afford to have theme parks. So it sort of collapsed. But for 5 years, it was incredible. The things I saw, people I met, and the people I scared.
But it's incredible. You taking horror actually to like a whole different level. It really is ingenious. I know in Disney World, one of my favorite rides, of course, was the Haunted Mansion. I love what they, I mean, right, because we're talking here about incredible creativity and just what you said, creating the whole ambiance, right, for people to experience. And you're afraid, but you're never so afraid that you're, you know, going to jump out of your skin or leave the ride or whatever. There's such a fine line. Well, my God, you are so fascinating. Jed, thank you for discovering each other on the sidewalk.
Well, I also learned a lot because Joe was also, you were the best friend and caretaker of a gentleman named Forrest Ackerman. And I admit that I did not know who he was, but again, I was fascinated. I did my research and I learned so much about this gentleman. And one of the things I liked was his nickname was the founding father of fandom. The founding father of fandom. Try saying that 5 times fast.
Corey invented a lot of things. He's credited with inventing cosplay and costuming because he and his friend Morojo wore the first science fiction costumes to the science fiction convention in the 30s. And Forey inspired me into the position I'm in at life now, my philosophies on life, because he was our oblivious mentor. He shared everything. He was the one that took us behind the scenes when entertainment magazines were just about the stars in front of the camera. Forey and James Warren, his publisher, created a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland that turned the camera from the stars to the people that made movies. And all of us little kids learned who a cameraman was and how scripts were written and who did the special effects.
Wow.
And kids like Steven Spielberg wrapped his sisters up in blue toilet paper and made his first movie. And kids like Rick Baker, 9-time Academy Award winner, said, wait a minute, it's not the doctors that make monsters, it's the makeup artists, and became a makeup artist. You know, Cassandra Peterson, Elvira, she was a fan of his reach is so extensive.
So this is like such incredible information. Unfortunately, our time is up. I have to do like a whole other 2 shows with you. You are a wealth. Thank you.
Your family now. I'll come see you anytime.
Oh my God. I'm taking you up on that. Jed, thank you for discovering Jomo. You really are. Thank you for everything that you brought here tonight. Happy Pride to both of you. And I want to get a picture real quick before I get cut, which is happening any minute now. Everybody say cheese.
Cheese.
Great. Happy Pride, everyone. Thank you.
Happy Pride.
Pride.